Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Small Business Show. I'm your host, Swire. My guest today is Jessica Rhodes from Interview Connections. Jessica founded the world's first leading podcast booking agency in 2013, when no other agency like this exists at the time. They recently awarded with the 2022 Bronze Stevie Award for Marketing Agency of the Year and Podcast Booking Agency of the Year by Corporate Vision magazines. Jessica and Interview Connections team is responsible for booking thousands of podcast interviews a year, leading to $1 million in revenue for their roster of incredible clients. She's also been podcasting since 2014 and currently co-hosts her podcast, Monetize the Mic. How you doing, Jessica?
Hi, Swire. I'm doing very well. How are you? I'm excited to be on your show.
Yeah, it's nice to speak to a podcast experts like yourself. For those of us who are intrigued by what you do, what should we know about your business and how did you come up with, helping people get on podcasts in 2013?
Yeah, well, when I started Interview Connections, I was first a virtual assistant. I wanted to be home with my son, who is now 9 years old. He's almost 10, actually. And I was a new mom. I wanted to be home and I needed to figure out how to have an income from home. So, my dad, who is a business coach, shout out Jim Palmer, he told me all about podcasting and online business. And he said, "Why don't you book me on podcasts?" I was like, "Sure." Nobody was offering podcast booking at the time. 2013 was still very early on in podcasting. So I just went to good old Google, started looking up business podcasts that interviewed business and marketing experts like my dad, and I started sending emails. And lo and behold, people were really receptive to somebody that wanted to book a great guest on their show. And I kept doing that. I got some other clients, and I really saw that there was an opportunity here. There were a lot of people that wanted to be on podcasts. There were a lot of podcast hosts that wanted help finding guests. So, since nobody was offering it as a service, my dad helped me create Interview Connections. And then I'm sure we'll get into it, but the rest is history, as they say.
I think it's very interesting, and especially I started this podcast almost 2 years ago now, seeing a lot more activities and now a lot more people. I think I would probably go past the why you have to be podcast, but then I wanted to have you on really. You put this show notes for me. I think it's very interesting, because I thought that if I go on podcasts, I want to broadcast myself. I want to somehow promote myself. But you're saying it's more of a networking strategy. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and this is so interesting because first we hear podcasts, we think broadcasting, visibility, and 100% it's all of those things. There are people listening to this show, watching the live stream who are watching, and I am getting visibility to your listeners and your viewers. But the thing that will get you a return on investment and results in your business the fastest, the easiest is through networking with the podcast host. And I'd like to actually share our story, Swire, because this podcast interview is first and foremost valuable to me because of the networking opportunity with you. So my team connected me with you. They said, "We booked you on Swire's podcast." And I'm like, "Great." We had a pre-call. By the way, quick side note, do pre-calls, podcast guests. So a lot of people think they're just this extra thing they don't want to do. There's a lot of value in having a conversation with the host before the actual recording, because what happened for me is I remember that pre-call was on a Monday. I was slammed. I had so much stuff back to back. I had this thing on my to-do list that I hadn't gotten done. I had to order promo products. I had to order promo products because I had some conferences coming up and we had nothing for the booth. And I'm like, it's been years since we've gone to a conference. I don't know what to order. I don't know where to go. And then I get on this pre-call and I learn that Swire sells promo products. And I'm like, perfect. I'm going to place an order with you. What kind of product should I buy? So that was super, super valuable to me because that's something that I had to get done. Swire gave me amazing guidance on what to get. By the way, we went with webcam covers, which are so cool and people loved them. And so, yeah, that was a networking result that saved me a ton of time. That now, everyone who got one of those at our booth at the conferences that we attended are staring at Interview Connections logo every day when they're looking at their computer. So super, super valuable. And that was all through the networking. And now the icing on the cake and the added benefit is the visibility I'm getting here on this podcast. But again, the first and most valuable thing was the fact that we networked and you helped me get something done that I really didn't know where to start with.
By the way, I didn't pay Jessica to say that. But that was a good example, right? I've had, conversation because of the podcast. I'm able to now talking to people. I want to use the word higher status than I do, right? As an entrepreneur, I'm able to, because using the podcast, it goes both way too. I like guesting on other people's podcasts, but using a podcast, you can actually talk to people normally wouldn't take your call or outside of your immediate circle, right? Because for an entrepreneur, if there's a particular interest or industry that you want to try to be on, it's actually a very good platform because you now talking with the another person, they can, you are open book, right? You are willing to answer some of the questions that the host might have. And then sometimes we go really deep into a particular, topic of the guest.
Yeah, absolutely. It is such a great strategy for talking to people that you wouldn't normally be able to just say, "Hey, can I have 30 minutes of your time?" But when there is the mutual benefit of podcasting and visibility and content creation, that's a win-win for everyone.
But what type of podcast would you say people should get into? Should I aim for, let's say I want to go on the Oprah Winfrey show, I want to go on the Michelle Obama podcast. Is that reasonable, or what type of podcast would you guide people through if they wanted to get into podcast castings?
Yeah, well, likely you will not be on those particular podcasts unless we happen to be speaking to people who are at that status. But you want to go on podcasts speaking to your target audience. When you're a business owner, you're a small business owner, you're an entrepreneur, and you need visibility for your business, you need to be attracting more qualified, warm leads and potential clients. You need to go on shows that are likely in the kind of small to mid range where maybe there are 100 people listening, maybe there's 500 or 3,000, but it's the right target audience. So when we work with our clients at Interview Connections, we first learn all about their business, their target audience. What are the pain points that their target audience struggles with? What are their what are their ideal clients interested in, right? What types of shows are they listening to? Who are their best referral partners, right? Who are the types of entrepreneurs and businesses that are referring business to them? And then we target the podcasts that have the highest percentage of the listening audience fit the description of that target audience. There are, of course, comedy shows or, like Oprah, things like that, where there's millions of listeners, but in that audience of 1 million people, there are people from all across demographic spectrums. There's people at all different income levels from all different walks of life. So you're likely not going to be speaking to a super qualified audience for your business. You would be, better off going on a show where maybe it's 200 people, but they're all ideal clients for you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Especially in marketing, if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. I would rather talk to a few selected individual, like you
Mhm.
said, who have the same pain point or really interested in what I'm saying, because if I go on to a big show, to talk about what I know in promotional product, I don't think like 1% of them, if they're interested, I think that will be really obvious. And really to answer the question for your business, would you rather have everyone to work with you, or would you rather to have the ideal client working with you? So I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, I mean, we have a client, Steve Wiedemann. He's an SEO consultant, and he got a client worth $60,000 in his company who listened to his interview on a show, which had 6 ratings. So just by all public metrics, that show is probably quite small, doesn't have a huge audience. But the thing is, it has the right audience. It had the right people listening who connected with Steve's message, who connected with his expertise, needed what he has, and now is paying him handsomely for it. So you don't need to be in front of a ton of people in order to close sales with the right ideal clients for your business.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree with me, because what I would also do when I guess is to bring a current topic that is related to what the host is about. For example, in my business, Fast Company actually wrote an article that actually bashed promotional product. Like we don't need promo item anymore at trade show. So my pitch to the marketing podcast right now is how I, as a promotional product, distributor, will respond to that, and then we have a discussion. And I think this bring out value to the host, and we go on different topics. I make my case, and how I counter argue why it's still relevant, and then we had a good conversation. Would you encourage people to bring in current topics onto discussion as well?
I think that's a great idea. If there is something trending that has to do with your business and what you sell, I think it makes a lot of sense to address it head on and pitch that as a topic. The caveat being make sure it's evergreen content. That might be a trending article right now, but it's still going to be relevant whether someone hears it today or in 5 years from today. So that's the thing that I would just watch for is unless it's like a daily news show, you want to make sure that your topic is evergreen and that if people listen to it today or in 5 years, they're still going to get relatively like the same type of value. So yeah, but I think that's a really, really smart way to pitch.
Thank you. I think one way to work on it, especially when you talk to an entrepreneur, they want to get their return on investment, right? What's my ROI? Obviously, there's a cost for getting a mic set up, getting a decent camera, and then if they work with interview connections, there's a fee for that. So
Mhm.
how would you justify the return on investment? And can you give us a couple more case study on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the fastest way to get a return on investment from podcast guesting, number one, keep your mind open to all of the different ways that podcast guesting can provide value to your business because there are direct financial returns on your investment, right? People hear you on a podcast, pay you lots of money for what you do. A host interviews you, becomes your client. That's direct financial ROI. There are also indirect financial returns on investment. You get links back to your website when people interview you. That boosts your search engine optimization. People Googling for what you do find you more easily, become your client. You might not be able to tie that client to a podcast interview, but the fact that you're getting interviewed on podcasts made it so that lead found you more easily. So that's kind of an indirect ROI. And that's something that, our clients tell us all the time that they dominate the search results when they get interviewed on a lot of podcasts. So it really helps more clients find them. And then indirect non-financial ROI is, honing in on your messaging. So if your messaging is just not quite resonating with your target audience, you will have a hard time closing sales in any marketing or advertising strategy. The more you get interviewed on podcasts, the better you become as a speaker. The more you will get these quick learning cycles where you'll know if people are not resonating, they're not reaching out, they're not visiting your website, it would be a good idea to look at your topics, to look at the questions you're pitching as, something that a host could ask you and see, do I need to shift this? Are these topics actually what my target audience wants to hear about? And maybe you update your messaging a little bit. Increased confidence. This cannot be talked about enough. In order to close sales and to grow your business, see an increase in revenue, you have to have a lot of confidence. Sales is not easy. You have to be able to be direct with people, have confidence in what you're selling. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people have a really hard time selling. Even if you own your own business, a lot of business owners have a really hard time selling. But the more you get interviewed on podcasts, the more practice you get speaking about what you do, the more practice you get talking about your business, which will make you a better salesperson. It will make you a better speaker. It will attract more opportunities into your life. So that is the kind of very indirect, non-directly financial return on investment. But certainly if you can improve your speaking skills and improve your sales skills, you will see your business grow.
Yeah, I think all the point that you are saying is true. For example, no shame shell promotion. If you Google now, Swire Ho, you actually see the podcast that I've been on, and I actually talk about my business. How I'm saying in different version of how to use promotional product. what if you're an expert in your industry? If people Google your name, and I'll suggest all the listener to Google your name right now, what will people see? Do you really own as an expert of your industry in the first two pages? I actually looked it up. I actually had the first three pages.
Yes. No, that's
How
so
how
I
would
love
that
that.
yeah, how would that do to your expertise? Because sometimes you might have the same name. You have maybe you don't have like a unique name like Swire. You might be conflicted with other people with the same name as you do. Can people really look? People are going to look you up. When they look you up and look up your company, what are the information that you want them to see? And by being a guest on podcasts, you can actually be on, like Jessica is saying, different SEO reasons, different backlinks, and then it showed up as you are one of the expert in your industry.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to build your brand. My friend Jacqueline told me that visibility is so incredibly important to her. That's why she's going on podcasts. And especially if you're a speaker, you will lose opportunities if you don't have a big enough online footprint. Like if you have nothing on your website, nothing on your social media, you're not creating content. People don't want to book you to speak. People don't want to hire an expert to help them with their business or whatever, you offer if you are not out there teaching and leading and providing value.
Yeah, I still remember the first podcast guest experience that I have. I made notes for about 2 hours. Like you said, is the confident issues, and am I able to talk about my business for sometimes it goes for an hour. Do you have enough content? So it made me do my research to understand my industry a little bit better. Now if you ask me questions about what I do, I could tell you if you want to go on like 2 hours. So I think it does get better. And then when it comes to a time that when I talk to a prospect, then he or she will ask me a question that I have no problem answering, because you already have the notes that you have. And if you keep on persistently going on podcasts, that's a skill that you have that is inside you.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does help you become such a great speaker and practice and knowing what are the questions, because if you are in a consultative sales role where you offer a service, your clients need to kind of understand what it is you do and how you work and why it's valuable, you'll end up answering a lot of the questions on podcast interviews that you may be getting in sales calls. And that makes it really easy to then share your podcast interviews with your prospects and help close the sale faster.
Yeah, I think this led me to another question. I think this fit into perfectly what I'm trying to do. I always want to find out how I can do more with less.
Yeah.
And you put it perfectly for me. How do you feel like you're everywhere to your audience, even you work less and earn more? How does that
Yeah.
work?
Absolutely. As I really ramped up my podcasting and podcast guesting, I was able to work less. There was so much more hustle and more hours and more tasks and more work when I wasn't being smart with how I was leveraging the content that was being created with podcasts. So it's all about repurposing. When you're a guest on a podcast, there is this amazing piece of content that is now being created for you, that you can take clips, you can take quotes, you can repurpose it into an article. You can be posting on social media about this interview that you did, create an Instagram reel. So when you repurpose your podcast interviews into the dozens of ways that you could repurpose it into written, video, audio, et cetera, people will now see you online. Whenever they're on social media, you will be popping up because you have made yourself visible. And it all started with this one piece of content that you can repurpose. So repurposing this content is the name of the game. This is how you will be able to look like you're everywhere and online all the time, even when you're not.
I think if the host is good, right? If they have the ability, or if they work with a good editing facility, they can pick out quotes that you
Yeah.
have mentioned during the show. And I normally do two video clip with the quote of the episodes for the
Hmm.
guests. So use that really, as your promoting too. These are free, add-on bonus, the host created for you. Imagine if you keep maybe a Rolodex of 50 of them. Then you actually rotate, and if with social media publishing too, you can actually have it every single week. It would be sounded like, well, they have a lot of quotes. They must know what they talked about, and so many good quotes coming from this person. I have to follow or work with this person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And even if the host doesn't create that content, if the host doesn't have a great editing team, they're not creating the video clips, you can be creating them. You can take the interview and edit some clips together. You'll often walk away from a podcast interview with an idea for more content. So last week I was on a podcast, and she said to me in the green room chat how she liked the fact that I gave the person's last name when I was like quoting somebody or giving a story. And she's like, that was, that's such a great tip for people. And I'm like, I didn't even think about that. So after the interview, I went on Instagram and I did a reel about it and I shared that as a tip. When you're in the day to day, like working in your business, you often will just get writer's block or content block, and you won't really know, like, what should I talk about? What tip should I give? What should I be telling my audience? But when you're on a podcast and the host is generating it from you, they're asking you questions, they're pulling it out of you, that will inspire you, and you'll think like, "Oh, this is a great tip. I'm going to go, say this thing on Instagram or post this on LinkedIn." And that's what will like create more activity and engagement on your social media.
That's a really good point. Now thinking of that, my goal is to try to find out why people like in our industry, and then with different people that I talk to, they have different questions. So now I know if the host is in this industry, they actually want this, and then they have this pain point. So when I approach other similar prospect now in the future, I know that they probably will have similar pain point, and I actually make more notes for myself that way. That's
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah. Love that.
Speaking of business now, Jessica, you started, the podcast guesting, services way before the pandemic. And now since the pandemic, I think every other week I'm seeing another agency pop up that, wanted to help people maximize, their guest experience. What do you think the industry is going? Do you think it's getting more competitive? And, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just actually had a great connect networking call with another business owner in the podcasting space. And we were just talking about how we really don't believe in competition. I know literally there is competition. There are other people that sell the same thing that we do, and there are other people that sell the same thing you do. But what I have found to be true is that everyone has a slightly different niche. Everyone has a slightly different kind of way that they package their services, a slightly different target audience. So my philosophy and the way that I operate as an entrepreneur is I kind of have my blinders up. I know that there are a lot of other people doing what we do, and I kind of take note and, well enough to be able to communicate the answer to a question of like, how are you different from this business or something like that. But we have really just stayed focused on like the value that we offer and what makes us different, and just knowing that it's ultimately up to a client or a lead, a prospect, to decide who they resonate with the most. So if somebody is shopping around for different services that you offer, and this is, how I think about it, I will give all my answers. I'll answer all their questions. I'll tell them what we do, but ultimately people will just choose like the person that they resonate with the most and that they vibe with the most. So the industry's growing. That's 100% true. There are lots of people figuring out how to, how to solve the problem of how do we help people get on podcasts? How do we help people get booked? And because there's so many different types of business owners at different revenue levels, able to invest different amounts and wanting to do it differently. Some people want a matchmaking email service, a software. Some people want somebody to personally be pitching them. Some people will want somebody in-house in their team full-time doing this. So because there's so many different people and different desires and different preferences, there can be so many different options.
Yeah, I like the confidence, like you're saying, you have confidence in your ability, and, if it works, great. If it doesn't, I think the market is getting bigger. So there, it could accommodate more agency with different focuses in there. Speaking of your business, I know that you have taken a real different approach when you started the business with, your employee, and now became the CEO of the business. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really important. And Margie and I both believe this that you need fresh perspectives and fresh visions to keep a business going long term. So I founded the business in 2013. I grew it and, hired employees, got an in-person office, really manifested my vision of having a business with employees locally into 2017. And then Margie really had the vision for how we could take the business to seven figures and what that would look like. And so that's when it made sense to have her be co owner because I didn't want to do it by myself anymore. She had this fresh vision, fresh perspective, new energy. And we have something really special together. I adopted her dad's cat after he died, so there was just a really unique connection that she and I had and still have, and we worked really well together first as employer and employee, and it just kind of like when you know. So she got 50% equity in the business. We've done whole podcast episodes about that, so I won't go into the whole story, but I really trusted my intuition. I did a lot of research into what that looks like in terms of like giving equity to somebody in your business. But ultimately just listened to my intuition and did what I wanted. She definitely asked for what she wanted. I tried to like offer her a smaller percentage and she's like, I deserve 50%. And I was like, honestly, you're right. And we do want to do this 50-50 because it's some people say you should have done 49-51, but then it's just, I don't know. That didn't feel right for us. So 50-50. And she really takes more of the CEO visionary business, like strategy stuff. And I really lead in sales and marketing.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's a really, open-minded thinking that you have because, when you talk to an entrepreneur, like you said, I'm going to be 60, you're going to be 40. I'm going to be bigger and have more control than you do. And it's wonderful that you could really share with, your partner and now, growing and moving forward the business.
Yeah. And sometimes it's nice to allow somebody else to have the control. And even though we're 50-50, we have very clear lanes in the business. So there's certain things like she makes decisions on, wage increases for employees. Like when people get raises, we'll typically talk about it, but that is her lane. She gets to decide ultimately like those types of decisions. Whereas, there's a lot of sales and marketing stuff that I'm not going to go to her on approval. So it's really just about like having good communication because even if you do have like a certain equity percentage, you still have to have a conversation and a trusting relationship with your partner.
Yeah, I think that's what's needed. You got to really talk about it, and if you don't, then you're holding things that are not communicating well with your partner or employees, and then when it comes to a decision making time, that's where all the troubles and come in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, last question that I have is, we talked about why guesting and some of the advantage and return on ROI on being a guest. How do we get started? If we it sounded like it's a good approach, what is the time? I think most people will stop them from going in is a time commitment, right? Because you do need time and
Yeah.
then you need to schedule to be on the show. And then there's also a financial commitment. So how would you guide people to get started and maybe ultimately decide if it is right for you?
Yeah. Well, first, just to start with your last question, like, is this right for you? Podcast guesting and podcasting can work for a lot of different businesses. The businesses that we tend to work most successfully with are service based businesses who have a high ticket. So let's say a consultant or a coach or an agency owner where one client is worth, at least $10,000. So you
Mhm.
don't have to close this super high quantity of sales in order for the investment financially and like a booking agency to really make sense. And that's where you can really focus on the host relationship and like converting a couple of hosts into clients ends up being a very positive ROI. So you don't need this like mass volume of leads. You really just need to talk to a few of the right people. So that's kind of who this is best for. In terms of how to get started, I always recommend creating a one sheet That's a great way to get started and just get something physical in place that will give you opportunities. So a one sheet it's a PDF, it has your bio, it has your interview topics and your interview questions. If you get that together, you will likely have interview opportunities come to you, because until you have a one sheet, it's going to be hard to get an interview booked. So get that created first. So that way, when you see opportunities arise, when people say, "Hey, I'm looking for guests for my podcast," you're ready to put your hat in the ring and show them your one sheet. That's also what you'll need if you have somebody pitching you, or if you're pitching podcasts, you need a one sheet. And yeah, this is all things that we help clients with. So if you are interested, just go to interviewconnections.com. We got lots of articles and resources there. And you can, of course, book a free consult call.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Jessica. If you have all your elements ready, because I'm going to ask for a pre-interview call. I will talk to all my guests beforehand and to make sure there's a good fit before I bring them onto the show. And if the guest have the stuff together, if they have the one sheets, and if they point out the talking point they wish to discuss on the show, and send us their social media page, I will look at them, right, as a host.
Mhm.
And also maybe previous podcast episodes that you've been on. So it saved my job so much easier. I don't do this for full time, and it saved me full time. Like, my consideration process will be for people who put it all together, especially, I have a recording engineer background. If they let me know that they have certain microphone, like for me, I'm a nerd in audio. Let me know what mic you have, what camera you have. I think that's a plus for me. And the last thing I want to do is to bring a guest on the show that their audio is not working, maybe their Wi-Fi is not working. I
Mhm.
still want to talk to you, but then the experience is not as good for the audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, such a good point. And get a microphone. Just want to put that out there. I did a reel about that on Instagram. I'm like, friendly reminder, you do need a microphone. You can get a USB one, but even if you're a guest and not a host, you still need a microphone.
Yeah, you could use that for your regular Zoom meeting too. Having a
Mhm.
microphone and a decent camera with good lights, maybe $500 is really, I think, is on the high end. But then when you're presenting to your client, I think you could actually use the same equipment as you go on
Yes.
podcast on your business meeting. You elevate
Mhm.
yourself much, much more.
Absolutely. Totally agree. I mean, this is the ATR 2100 and it's like $100 on Amazon. It's not that much and it sounds good.
Yeah, it does. Jessica, I think you talked about your website. What would be the best way to reach out to you if listeners have a personal question that they want to ask you about?
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Jessica Rhodes, Rhodes. You can connect with me. Just add a note when you send a connection and just say you heard me on Swire's podcast. So that would be the best way to get directly in my inbox. But again, interviewconnections.com. You can feel free to reach out. Me and my team get all those inquiries through our website. So whatever you prefer, LinkedIn or our website.
Thank you so much for coming on to the show today, Jessica.
Thanks, Swire.